Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Spicy Podcast. I'm Omar, joined by my usual co-host Tarek.
Hello, everyone.
And in addition to the usual gang, we also have a special guest. His name's Leo. You guys might know him from the centrist group, but Leo is a history major, and he's going to give us some insight in regards to European economics. Leo hails from the great country of Greece, known for its lavish economy. And
souvlaki.
souvlaki, yes, of course. You can't forget that.
Its hopes and prospects for the future.
Yeah, and also for making a really cool movie. What year did 300 take place? Do you know?
Oh, jeez. I don't know. I can't remember, but it was just really cool. I remember when it came out, my father and mom went crazy, and they took us. It was this big. It was a big deal in my household.
I mean, I heard a comment that said it's actually a good movie because that's more or less how Herodotus described the war. So in a way, if you want to blame all the lavish shit, you can blame it on Herodotus, not on the movie.
Exactly.
And also, let's not forget our sponsors today. Thank you, the People's Republic of China. We really appreciate the funds and the scholarships that you provided to us to go study in your great communist country. Praise Mao and praise the People's Republic.
And I just want to say thank you to the People's Republic of China for peacefully taking over the world via economics and capitalism.
Economic stimuli.
May the U.S. Divulge into feudalism and the People's Republic of China go on to conquer the whole world with its peaceful means. All right, with that being said, let's jump right into the topic. So, Europe. How's Europe doing, everybody? I think that Europe's doing... I think
amazing. Thanks
great.
for asking.
No.
Yeah, funny you should ask, you know.
All right. I mean, okay, I would say that Europe is doing good, but at the same time, it's not doing great. I'd say it's just kind of meh right now, you know?
Well, I think the scope of this conversation is going to be the dichotomy between North and South, but right now we're going to try to give you some contextual idea of how Europe is doing overall. We kind of see that in terms of GDP per capita, the North is obviously doing very well. And for some reason, Ireland is doing very well. We're not really sure why. Obviously, they have some good industries going on, but they've bounced back from the condition that they were in previously. You go south...
They're kicked out of Pigs Gang. They're kicked out of the Pigs Gang.
Exactly. You go south, most of the post-Soviet states are doing not well, obviously, in comparison to their northern counterparts, but they're doing okay, with some notable exceptions like Moldova. Ukraine is doing pretty poorly. Belarus is they're at the threshold of about $20,000 per capita a year for PPP. And then the neighboring, like the Balkan states, are obviously doing bad because I don't know if you guys know this, but they had some pretty big civil wars. A couple of people died. It's not that big of a deal. But comparatively, Greece is doing okay because their GDP per capita is just at around 26,000. The main concern is that they're in a decline right now, and we don't know if that decline is going to continue. But again, as a contextual overview, we can see that they're doing relatively good compared to their neighbors, like Macedonia, which is the rightful heir to Greece.
Absolutely. I would have to agree with you there, Omar.
Well, I would say that we shouldn't just think about GDP per capita. We also have to think of GDP growth and expected GDP growth. And indeed, of course, Northern Europe happens to also have a much better prospects when it comes to that. Northern Europe is growing quite well, especially when it comes to Germany and to Sweden. They're doing really well. Finland not so much.
You can't forget Belgium.
What is that?
Don't forget Belgium.
What is a Belgian?
Oh, my bad.
No, but we have to remind ourselves of that. While in the meantime, we have Southern Europe just going to shit. Basically, we still have very high unemployment rates, especially among the youth. If I'm not mistaken, in Spain, Greece, and some parts of Italy, the unemployment amongst the youth is bordering 50%. So that's a lot. Imagine like half the people you know are just unemployed. While you have Eastern Europe, and that's kind of I wouldn't say it's bad for them. Of course, they haven't reached the same conditions as Western Europe in terms of prosperity and all that. But Eastern Europe, some countries are doing quite fine, especially what you call the Central Europe. It's Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and
Yeah.
also the Baltic countries. So in a way, let's say that they're doing quite okay. Not gonna lie. So those are the prospects here, I'd say.
Well, a problem that a lot of these post-Soviet states have is that a large number of their population is leaving because of employment stagnation. Even like if you look at Poland as a whole, although their GDP is doing relatively okay, they are suffering from some big unemployment issues. And
Well, I would say the saving grace for a lot of these post-Soviet states, like Poland, was in fact kind of the EU in a way, because the EU gave them opportunity, if they had a European passport, to go to these other countries where they could make more money than they could in Poland, let's say, for example. So I think that's the core issue there, where they're leaving not because they want to leave, but because they're going to make more money if they go somewhere else.
Yeah, and another thing is that contributes to lowering the total unemployment rate. Imagine if these people were landlocked and they couldn't leave to immigrate to, say, the UK or whatever. Then you see a much higher unemployment rate. But as a result of people, I think it's 10% of their population has left Poland to seek employment outside inside of the EU. That's bringing the numbers down, and that's making their economy look a lot better than it actually is if they didn't have that opportunity. And then we kind of shift more towards Italy. Italy has really high unemployment, but they're not seeing the same situation as Poland. For some reason, a lot of the population doesn't tend to migrate as much, and I don't know what the numbers are specifically, Tarek, if you want to pull it up or something, but they're very staggering. And the Italian economy as a whole, alongside of Greece, is in a decline as well. It's been in decline since 2008, and I think right now they've seen a little bit of an increase due to the recent elections. But I don't know how much of that is just, the market. With each kind of election cycle, you see a little increase or decrease in the GDP. But yeah, I think the most interesting one is Greece, though, Leo, if you want to touch upon that.
So for me, I would say that the GDP in Greece, I believe I think it's still in a decline, or it'll go up like by 1%, but then it'll go down. So it's in a really weird spot right now. But the issue with Greece as a whole, I would say, with unemployment and everything, is that the main industry that Greece focuses on, if you will, is tourism. We're kind of like, I say, we're like the Florida of Europe in a way,
Yeah.
where we've been told by the outside, the EU, Germany, Belgium, all those countries, that okay, you got to focus on your bread and butter, which is tourism. Don't focus on any other industry. We won't have it if you focus on any other industry, and just focus on tourism. And there's not a lot to be done with tourism in the way of employment. You can only employ so many people with tourism in hotels and restaurants, bars, clubs, and all that stuff, if you will. You can only just do so much. And I don't know how they expect there to be an economic turnaround with the focus on just tourism when Greece has so much in the way of resource potential. You look in the Aegean with natural gas and oil. If you start drilling for those resources, there's a lot of jobs right there, Kind of an interesting just to look at.
Well, so I don't know what you think about this, but it's been floated around that because Poland, for example, has not switched over to the euro and they're still in their native currency, people have a lot more incentive to go there for vacation because their currency exchange is a high amount in the Polish currency. Whereas people coming to Greece, they're still using the euro, right? And they're not seeing it as very cost effective. People are more likely to go to Turkey now as a result and get the same experience in regards to, I want to go on a island vacation. And they only have to use the lira, right? And that exchanges to a far higher amount in, let's say, the euro, right? So I don't know what exactly your perspective on that is, but that's just a theory I've heard.
I would have to kind of agree with that. Before Greece went to the euro, we had the drachmi, the drachma, and before if you were an American, let's say, and you went to Greece and you brought with you, I don't know, let's say like $5,000, you'd live like a king for however long you decided to stay, because you'd get a lot of drachmas for that. I don't know the exact exchange rate or what it was, but I'm aware that it was a lot of money, and people were more inclined to spend a lot more money because they would get more bang for their buck. So there's merit to that theory you have. But I will say though, the idea with the euro was that it would be on par with the American dollar. So whatever you're bringing to spend in American cash, that's kind of what you would be spending in euros.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, I don't know, for me it's kind of like a double-edged sword now, where people, they still want to go to Greece and spend their money, but they're not inclined to spend as much because they think they're not getting the same bang with their buck like they should be.
So I'd like to make some points here. if you stop to think, tourism is a very volatile industry. It's kind of fucked up, and Greece relies a lot on it. If I'm not mistaken, Greece, 12% of Greece GDP is based on tourism, and well, any financial crisis that happens, you think that people would just, when the buck runs dry, you think people are thinking about traveling. No, they're not. So I'd say that Greece's reliability on tourism was somewhat of a problem, a double-edged sword, double-edged sword. Through one side, it can grow a lot with tourism, especially if you're in a very touristic area, which is the Mediterranean. But on the other hand, it's an industry that can really just vanishes in a second if you stop to think about it.
Which I would agree with Tarek about that. And then again, it goes back to what I said before. You can only employ so many people with tourism. You can only make so much money with tourism. You know, it's kind of screwed up because they're dependent on having one good summer
Yes.
to make a lot of money. A lot of families are dependent on having a great turnout, you know, of tourists to come eat at the restaurant in the summer. It's a lot of mom and pop shops that are dependent on this tourism, and they've got to take a step away from. If I'm the Greek government, personally, what I would do is I would take a step away from this smaller scale economy and the tourist based economy and say, all right, what can we do to actually start building actual industry and actual jobs? But there are roadblocks in the way of that, whether it be from the EU or within Greece itself.
So, do you think that the EU has been a net benefit or a net negative?
Had we had an economic crisis without the EU, I think it might have been a bit worse, but I think we would have been able to rebound with our own currency. I don't think we would have as much debt as we would now, because a lot of this debt taken out, I would say it was either, I wouldn't say it was forced, but it was very much pressured on the government to take out these loans. Like, oh, you need these loans to survive. And you know, a lot of the austerity advice and a lot of the austerity they've kind of pushed on Greece, I think it's had an overall negative effect, especially in the way of taxes, because again, how do you expect when the bread and butter of your economy is small business, how do you expect small businesses to survive when you're taxing them to oblivion? And furthermore, how do you expect people to come and invest in your country if your taxes are outrageously high?
Tarek,
Yeah.
in regards to this, if you look at what Leo's saying about their economy and their industry, how they're making their GDP, we look at the North, the means that they're making their GDP is totally different. Ireland was an example that we looked at and how they're exporting high value items. Do you think that these Nordic countries are doing pretty much the same thing by exporting medicinal equipment and things along those lines, that really Greece is they're not in a place to be exporting those types of valuable items?
So yeah, that's one thing I wanted to touch upon, because well, this is no rocket science. You have goods with much more aggregated value. You have goods that can be sold for much higher. For instance, you cannot expect that you can sell a refrigerator or highly innovative goods the same way you can sell olive oil, as in the case of Greece, or much
I
less
would agree.
manufactured goods. So and
It's not just Greece, I would say. It's the whole of Southern Europe. You know, it's just this divide. You've got the industrial powerhouse of the north that has been producing these kinds of goods for a while, where in the south, it's more of an agrarian, you know, farm-based economy mixed with tourism. And, you know, you've got industry here and there. Whereas in the case of, like, Italy, for example, Italy, they sell olive oil. They sell the agricultural goods, but they make things like cars, and they sell them. But it's not as powerful, let's say, as a German car in the market.
no, obviously, I'll say that the point here is that the southern European countries are much more inclined towards these small businesses, and usually with very little specialization or very little aggregated value to their goods. That's not something so hard to imagine, that of course you're going to sell your goods for a much lower price, a much lower demand than the industrialized goods of the north, and that of course going to create an imbalance in the European Union. I mean, even inside European countries, or even inside the states themselves, you can see in the United States you have states which are not so innovative or cannot make such an industry, and you have the same problem in the EU. You have these countries in the south which have quite poor industries, and you have the countries in the north with much richer, much more innovative and competitive industries. And what that has to do with the current situation is that you can't really apply the same policies as you would in the north to those you would in the south.
Which is I would agree the issue, because a lot of the time, you have these EU officials who come down, let's say, to Greece, right? And they're from Germany, or they're from Northern Europe, and they say, oh, you need to put this policy. It works for us. It's gonna work for you. Just do it, like the
Yeah,
austerity in
especially
the case
when
of
austerity
Greece.
comes in place. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think this is a really good
it's
segue.
killer. It's killer.
I think this is a really good segue into sentiments, because all of these are kind of accumulating into how it affects the general population, how they feel about the situation that they're in. I know that in Greece there's a large polarization occurring.
Yes.
You want to touch upon that a little bit?
So right now in Greece, I would say it's gotten to the point where there's no middle ground. There's no sensible person, center right or center left, or just any, like, your run of the mill. Let's say, for example, Republican or Democrats in the U.S., like regular politicians. It's gotten to the point where it's so polarized. You're either on the far left or you're on the far right. Most notably, I think the group that's gotten the most attention in the views of the outside world of Greece would be the far right in Greece. It would be Golden Dawn. And they're the third largest party, I believe, right now. They're the Nazi party, if anybody's not aware, which is, it's a sad thing for Greece. As a Greek, you see this, and you have to be upset by it, because it's kind of like, okay, our grandfathers fought a war against this. We know we have family who died fighting this ideology. How could they possibly become the most popular ideology? And well, the answer is simple. They're the only ones who are going around helping Greeks that need help. Something the government should be doing, or something the EU should be doing, because the Greeks are EU citizens. There are Greeks who are hungry, who can't afford to either keep a roof over their head or buy basic needs for their children. It's gotten so bad. And this group, Golden Dawn, they go around and they help these people. They put on the facade of, we're going to fight the good fight. We care about you. Nobody else cares about you. And lo and behold, the Greek government's proving them correct, because time and time again, it's like they're slapping the Greek people in the face. And then you have the people on the outside of Greece, let's say, for example, in Germany. I have a lot of German friends from school, and they say, well, how can you Greeks support Nazis, especially after everything that happened? And I turn around and I tell them, well, how did the Nazis rise to power in Germany? Did you not have a bad economic crisis? Did the Nazis not go around helping people, promising to change everything? Is that not how they came to power? Why are you so surprised?
Yeah, and we don't really see this in the north of Europe because their economies are so stable. Obviously, we see some fringes, but they're not. I mean, Todd, if you live in Sweden, I don't think they're nowhere near as popular as, say, like the Golden Dawn.
Well, I would say there is one party that people are getting super triggered on, which is the Swedish Democrats, as you call it in English, which is kind of your postmodern rightist party. They're quite center-right. Their discourse is not very different from that of the UKIP or the Front National. It's just a conservative, usually anti-immigration sentiment. But overall, I wouldn't say they're far-right in no way. Of course, although the Swedes label them far-right, but they're not. But then again, if they are the third largest by now, apparently for this election, but the real far right parties, I mean, these are like real guys with real nationalist symbolism and all that. These guys never really get past one or maybe two posts at the local council, so it's nothing to be worried here yet, I'd say.
I think that we touched upon this in previous podcasts, but immigration really is a catalyst for people in a bad economy. It really pushes these right-wing parties to come into prominence. And like I said, in Northern Europe, they're doing so well economically. These parties aren't really popular. They don't, I guess, strike at the heart of the average man, because, I mean, if you're doing good, who cares? But if you're in Greece and you have all these immigrants coming in and you're already doing poor economically, then you're more inclined to say, well, I support these guys, and you're going to be more proactive in supporting them.
So I would say something that kind of goes towards along the lines of what you said. An example I have, where my mother's from. My mother's from an island, Lesvos, but she's from this area called
That one
Mytilene.
is fair.
And there's
Is she a
7,000.
lesbian?
Actually, they have their. I believe they have the International Lesbian Convention on the island every year there. But there's 7,000 migrants away from my mother's village, at a camp, right? And a lot of this, the villages and a lot of the industry in Mitidini is relying on tourism. Now, from what I've heard from family, is that they're not making any money this summer, and they're not gonna because people are less inclined to go to that area because of the refugees. Because these refugees, they're not very. I wouldn't say. I honestly wouldn't even call them refugees. You know, the typical war refugee, you think of the Syrian. The Syrians already came to Greece. They passed through Greece at the start of their war. A lot of these people are just economic migrants looking to take advantage of the situation in the EU. At least that's how I perceive it. That could just be my bias, but a lot of these people don't want to be around these migrants because of the way they act, and they're less inclined to spend their money, and it hurts the small business of the already struggling Greek family who, let's say, owns a restaurant or owns a small business, you know?
Uh, so again, this is another good segue that goes into border security. We kind of see this push by EU as a whole to accept migrants, and we see a little bit of a pushback from Greece and the other neighboring countries. How tough do you think the pushback is from Greece onto the EU?
Um, well, I kind of see it as Greece. They're the little kid who kind of waves their fist at the EU, saying like, "Hey, we need help. You need to help us. We can't handle this situation on our own." And then you see the issue is it's not that Greece can't say no to these migrants. They're capable of saying no. They don't have to take them in. But the issue is Turkey sends these migrants on boats and they just kind of force them out of the sea. And then they kind of say, well, are you going to let these people die? The Turkish
Yeah,
government's all about, are you going to have these people's blood on your hands?
yeah, that's a
So
very important topic actually.
it is, and then you have Germany, the powerhouse of the EU, who's all knowing and can do everything, who goes and makes a deal with Turkey about the migrants. Okay, we're gonna stop the flow of migrants from Turkey. We're gonna ease it. We're gonna take care of it. Turkey agrees to it. Okay, well the flow of migrants hasn't stopped. It might not be as bad, so I guess you could make the argument and say, oh, the policy works, but they're still sending people over on boats, and it's not changing.
Well, I guess this is kind of like all these topics don't cover everything specifically, talking about the European economy. But if you were to wrap it up, how would you?
I think Europe at this point it's a repeating cycle. They're doomed to not learn from their past, right? So you've got a resurgence of a far right group, civil unrest, economic unrest, and if they don't come together and look for not a short-term solution for the here and now, rather than okay, how can we make this problem better so people 20 years down the line don't have to worry about it. They need to just come together and do that. They need to be okay. How are we going to fix this the here and the now? What policy can we enact here and now to combat the rise of the far right? What can we do to ease the economic struggle for the Greek people? What can we do to encourage a strong industry in Greece that's not just touristic?
And Tarek, what's your perspective from the other side, from the northern
Oh yeah,
side?
from the northern side. I'll say that Leo has a good point because the problem with the EU is that has been in this situation of being very fragmented economically. At least you have these very specific parts, very how to say uneven parts. I don't want to say fragmented, but uneven parts, and there has been efforts to trying to remedy this, but they've been quite superficial, to be honest. And while the EU doesn't really come together and realize that, well, we're one continent now and our fates are bound, it's not going to happen. I would say that the main problem here is that the way the EU was structured was to absorb these newer countries for cheaper labor force and cheaper resources for our industry, and then they kind of forgot that, oh, we have to develop these guys. Maybe not. So that was the problem, because the EU always counted on expanding itself to get newer members as other members developed. For instance, Poland, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, as they developed, and they didn't really were a source of cheap goods anymore. They started to, okay, let's start bringing in newer members, but now we're running out of newer members, so it was quite of a, unsustainable model, and Greece is just the forefront from that.
I would have to agree with Tarek about that. For example, in Greece right now, I'd say there's kind of, because of the high youth unemployment, a lot of people end up going and leaving Greece after they get their degrees, after they finish school. So there's kind of this brain drain going on. So when I hear people say, "Oh, the Greek youth is lazy, they don't work, they don't do this and that." Okay, well my question is, how many Greeks are living abroad in Germany who are either engineers, doctors, lawyers, with higher education? How many Greeks are there in Germany just working in general because of this brain drain? So it's just a weird situation, and I think everybody's got a role to play in this. You can't just point fingers at everybody. Not at any specific person, not everybody. My
And
apologies.
then again, the EU is quite uneven, and they can't just expect the Southern European countries to have the same to implement the same policies in the south as you would in the north and expect the same results. That's another very important point, which people. It's quite known that they acknowledge this, that the European policymakers acknowledge this, but they still don't want it. They just turn a blind eye. You can't expect the same austerity measures that have been implemented in Northern Europe to work in Greece, and they haven't. They haven't. But still, people are just pressing on it.
Well, I think that our sponsors said it best when they elaborated that the People's Republic of China should take over all of Europe and
I agree.
implement their commune capital market Maoist Xi
That
Jinpingist ideology.
that's what we need more of, Chinese investors. We need Chinese investors to purchase our ports, to purchase our infrastructure, and teach us to stop being the landlords. I think it's time we start working the land.
Exactly. Mao willing, everyone will be speaking Chinese, specifically Mandarin, as Mao spoke.
By 2050.
Yes, exactly. Anyways, guys, this was a pretty good episode. We can go into more of these topics specifically and go into more detail. But hopefully, this overview was helpful and insightful, specifically from the two perspectives that we have, which is the North and the South, and me in the middle doing nothing. So, again, thank you, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next one.
太阳是毛泽东哎，他领导我们的解放哎，真理翻身当家。